This took place during the summer of 1993. I was living in Montana but had a boyfriend in British Columbia, and I often traveled between the two places. We were broke and careless, so we hitchhiked when we needed to get somewhere further than biking distance. I had spent the month of August with him in BC, and eventually it was time to go back to school. I, of course, not having worked much at all that summer, had no money. My bum-ass boyfriend hadn't come through with any money for a bus ticket either. My parents were mad at me, so they weren't giving me any money. All my friends were broke, but we didn't have a phone to call them anyway. We were living in a 2-room cabin with no running water in the mountains. The only phone was a party line that belonged to the neighbors and was basically only for emergencies. The decision was made. I was already 2 days late for school and I didn't feel like panhandling for a bus ticket. I had to get back and couldn't wait for my boyfriend's money to materialize. It would be my first time hitchhiking alone. I put my backpack's worth of stuff together, making sure I had my ID, because one time we hitched to the border, left Canada and tried to get into the US before I realized I had left my ID in Canada, meaning I had no ID to enter the US, but also no ID to get back into Canada. But that's a story for another day, and hit the road. Things went surprisingly smooth for the majority of the trip. An elderly couple picked me up as soon as I got off the mountain and into town and took me all the way to Creston, right near the border crossing. I walked across and was almost immediately picked up by a guy who at first gave me mild creeps, but all he did was lecture me about how dangerous it was to hitchhike alone and how much I reminded him of his daughter. He took me all the way to Coeur d'Alene, which was damn near half the trip. I was actually having phenomenal luck. I walked to just outside the city limits and stuck my thumb out. 1 hour went by, then 2. You're often walking really slow when you're trying to catch a ride, and eventually I came across a small flap of cardboard. I picked it up, thinking I could walk off at the next exit, borrow a marker at a gas station, and make a sign. I thought that might help me get a ride. So I'm walking alone a little faster now, and suddenly I see something moving in my peripheral vision. I tense, look and see it's a 2-foot, thin, dark snake trying to get over the cement guardrail to the shoulder. He was never going to make it. He was kind of trying to throw himself over it sideways. I happen to kind of like snakes, and he looked pretty harmless, so I used my sign as a shovel and pitched him over the wall. In hindsight, I should have realized the snake was a bad omen. Before I could reach the next exit, a car slowed to a stop. It's always creepy when a car stops and you're walking up to it, trying to judge if it's a Ted Bundy or just an eccentric like you. My heart always sank a little when it would be a single man, but I soon realized he wasn't alone. There was a kid in the front seat who was probably aged 10 to 13. The guy was a little too friendly, but what was he gonna do? Murder me in front of his kid? I was very young and dumb. I decided to get in. The man was pretty chatty, introducing the kid as his nephew. He said they were driving back to where they lived in St. Louis from visiting his brother in Seattle so the kid could visit his grandma. The kid hardly said a word. If I remember correctly, and it's been a very long time, it's about 3 hours to where I lived from Coeur d'Alene. He was taking Highway 90 right past the city I lived in, so I was relieved I wouldn't have to get out of the car and thumb it again. The first hour goes by, and it's friendly chit-chat, lots of family anecdotes, and general small talk. The switchblade my boyfriend gave me was cradled in the bottom of my palm the whole time, up my sleeve and out of view, but I began to relax a little. He kept up the friendly chatter, but eventually the questions he asked took a raunchier turn. Like, did I have a boyfriend? What was he like? What did we like to do? What was our favorite position? What? I silently panicked. Like, oh fuck, this guy is a creep after all. My instinct was to play along with his conversation while I tried to figure out what to do. I was pretty sure the drink he had in the console, in a convenience store cup, had more than pop in it, because you could see him physically getting looser as the drive went on. He kept asking gross questions, and I was so embarrassed for his nephew but still playing along. I just tried to breathe deeply to keep from having an anxiety attack and concentrated on extricating myself from his car. Eventually, he made it clear that he expected me to have sex with him in exchange for the ride. Door-to-door service, he said. Then it got worse. And find one of your girlfriends for my nephew. he said with this hyper-cheerful, also menacing smile that made my stomach drop. Yeah, I had to get away from this guy ASAP. At this point, we were about 20 minutes from the town I lived in. I was like, sure, and started making stuff up about a phantom hot, slutty friend I had. Then it finally hit me what I could do to get away. I put on my best come-hither smile and said to him, "You know, I bet she's home now. Let's go straight over to her place when we get into town and get this date started." So I had him get off at my exit and asked if I could get some beer first for our date. In Montana, you could buy beer at gas stations, so I had him stop at a place a few blocks from where I lived. When he somewhat reluctantly went inside to buy beer, which I knew was in the back of the store, I opened my door and sprinted down the alley about a block and dove into a huge clump of bushes, folded myself up as tight as I could, and waited. I still had my knife, but now it was out of my sleeve. I was shaking and my heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it would explode. I tucked my head into my knees and waited, listening for his car to come down the alley. When he had got to the gas station, it was about 4 p.m. and September, so there was still plenty of light. I stayed in those damn bushes until night fell, and then I finally sprinted home. His car never came down the alley, but I could hear him yelling for me. He sounded pissed. I got in my front door, locked and deadbolted it, and collapsed, dirt and little leaves all over me. My roommate was like, "What the fuck happened to you?" I told her the abbreviated version and she said, "Why didn't you call me? I would have picked you up at the border." For context, I'm a 5'2" female who couldn't handle herself in a fight against a tissue. This just happened earlier today, and I can't think of a better place to vent about it. I work for USPS as a city carrier. For those that don't know, that means I walk, a lot, and through all types of neighborhoods. That being said, I worked in a relatively small town, and while there were some parts of it that were mostly run down, I've never had any bad encounters. Until today. The last bit of my route is 3 streets that run parallel to each other, so you walk up and down one street, drive the car to the next, and walk up and down it, etc. I'd say it's a low to middle income area, but nothing that makes you feel uneasy. Just a bunch of cheap college apartments and a few rundown houses. I'm beginning the first of my streets and I see this man, maybe 20 years old, riding his bike on the opposite side of the street, but going in the same direction I am. I thought nothing of it and went about my business. He ended up turning a corner at the end of the block and I forgot about him. I'm continuing walking down the same street when I notice this guy is right next to me again. I think it's a little bizarre, but figured he's taking laps around the block or something. Mind you, it's a solid 10 degrees outside today, with snow on the ground. So looking back, it's a bit strange that somebody would be out for a casual bike ride. But people have done weirder things. I'm finishing up at the last houses on the street and heading back to my van when I notice this dude is now going the same way I am again, even though I had turned around and started going the opposite direction now. I thought everything was a coincidence, until I drove down the next street. My first stop there is an apartment box. For those who might not know, that's one huge mailbox with several mailboxes inside of it. And all that means is I have to spend a decent amount of time there because there's maybe 16 people's mail I'm sorting out. While I'm doing that, the guy shows up again and just sits on his bike, blankly staring at me a few yards away while I work. I again gave this all the benefit of the doubt and think that maybe he's just waiting for me to finish the box so he could check his mail. As I lock it up and move on to the next house, I see him following behind me. When I stop at a house to deliver, he stops in the street and stares. It's at this point I decide there is something going on that I need to distance myself from, and go back to my van despite having almost the entire street left to deliver. I go back to the post office and tell my boss what had happened, and he agrees to have me deliver mail for another route on the opposite side of town. I gladly do this, and it takes maybe an hour and a half. I figured they'd trade off the mail and somebody else would go finish the small portion I had left with the creepy dude. Not so much. Once I get back to the office, I get asked to go finish the route from this morning. I was hesitant, but the point was made that it was hours later. It had started raining, because why would they be there 2 hours later on a bike in the rain? And that they'd send somebody to patrol the street. Fine. I head back out with a coworker following in another car behind me. I finished the street I had left earlier without any problem, so he heads back to the office. I move to my last street, feeling relatively at ease and start to wonder if I was overreacting this morning. I get to the end of my first half of the street, conveniently the farthest I can get away from my vehicle during this entire ordeal. And there he is. He pops out from behind a house on his bike, riding furiously in my direction. Panic sets in. I try to stay calm as I act as if I wasn't bothered by his presence at all, but he's riding right on my heels, speeding up to get in front of me and then just blankly staring through me again until I pass him and the following continues. I casually put my hands into my bag so my hands are free, that way I can get my mace as I call my boss. I didn't want this guy to know I was panicking and calling for help, so I pretended my boss is another city carrier just a few streets away. "Hey Dave, I know you're working just a couple blocks away from here and I have a couple really heavy packages I need you to help me deliver. I'm on Harrison Street now," etc. My boss was so confused. He started telling me how he wasn't a few streets over and that I was calling the wrong person while I'm practically yelling over him. "Oh yeah, I can get the numbers off the packages. Hold on, let me get to my car. Just don't hang up yet. I can get them right now." Because I really didn't want him to hang up. This guy hasn't said a word to me, but is still right on my heels. Literally. Had I stopped walking, he would have ran my ankle over. I make it back to the car and tell my boss what is actually happening while this dude circles around me. As I drive away down the street, I see him racing on his bike behind me, chasing my car. I made a few turns down the blocks trying to see if I could lose him, and he's behind me the entire time until I reach the busy main road where he stops. The cops were called, and I was instructed once again to return to the street to finish the mail with the cops patrolling the area to hopefully bait this dude into getting caught. No surprise he didn't show up. Nothing changed for me at work. My bosses didn't seem to care what had happened to me, and unfortunately I am not in a position to just up and quit my job, although I am looking for a new one, and I have ended up having to grin and bear being put back on the same route that all this happened on. It's been almost 2 weeks since the original encounter, and up until Wednesday I thought maybe the person was just trying to mess with me and now he was over it because I hadn't seen him again. January 10th. I was on my last street for the day and I was starting to loosen up since I was about to turn around and head back up the street to my vehicle when I saw him. The car is a little more than 600 feet away and he is standing on the sidewalk midway between me and it, just staring at me. I immediately try to calculate my options. I decided it was either attempt to get past him to my car, or pick a random house and start knocking, hoping to God somebody answers the door quickly. Fight or flight kicked in and all I could think about was getting back into my locked car and getting the hell out. So that's what I tried to do. I crossed the street to create at least some distance between us, and was sort of relieved when I saw that he didn't follow suit. At this point he's still a good 300 feet away from me and I'm not sure why, but something is telling me to just avoid direct eye contact with him and keep walking. As I get closer to him, however, I could see that he was masturbating, right there on the sidewalk in broad daylight, just staring at me. Fear took over and I immediately started sprinting, but I was met with the hair-raising sound of his shoes echoing mine. He was screaming, "Hey, you, girl!" Something else, but due to my adrenaline and sheer panic, it just sounded like muffled noise that I can't recall. I thought about turning around to mace him as he was getting closer and closer to me, but at the moment running was working, and I didn't want to risk some horrible horror movie scene scenario when I trip. Luckily, running worked, and I got back to my car and locked it and called the police. I don't know why I didn't move the car immediately. I guess I was just too focused on getting officers there to help me out, but I don't know. As I'm on the phone with dispatch, this guy is circling my car, dick out, making obscene gestures and trying to get me to look at him. Finally, something clicks in my head that I'm not trapped there, and I can in fact just drive away. So I do. I go up the street and turn into a busy apartment complex to talk to the officer that showed up. I watched the guy turn around and run back inside the house he was originally standing in front of. So for those of us wondering how the hell he found me the second time in my last story, he lives right there on that street. Cops followed up with me later that evening and informed me that they had made contact with the individual, and that they'll be getting a hold of me soon. But so far that's all I've heard. As far as my bosses are concerned, they aren't taking anything seriously since the guy didn't physically touch me and have scheduled me back on that same route next week. I'm looking for a new job, So hopefully this is the last update you'll hear about this. Fingers crossed. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. And if you would like to help support the channel, I recommend checking out the sponsor button down by the subscribe button, which you should have also hit by now. It will give you a few perks, one of those including a channel badge, so you'll look really cool. Like, really cool. You don't even know how cool you'll look until you get it. And you'll also get early access to my content. So I gotta say, in the first story, man, that lady has some balls hitchhiking alone like that. I know it can even be dangerous for men. I can't imagine being a single woman trying to do it. Well, not really single, but like single because you're alone at the time. There's a lot of weirdos out there, and you're never really going to be able to judge someone by first impressions. So hitchhiking, it's always a gamble. Fortunately, this gamble paid off. I'm glad she made it out alright, as well as the second story with the creeper dude trying to whack off around her. People are fucking weird. So I know these aren't the scariest, but they are kind of creepy, and you can understand why people are a little weirded out by people. I guess maybe it's a good thing I'm not a woman, because I'd be going around like Steven Seagal cock puncher. Cock puncher! What movie was that in? I don't remember, but it was funny as shit. Alright everybody, I hope you have a great day, and I will catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always super creepy if it's true. Bad bye.